Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wizard Factory video podcast, where you subscribe to weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and ourselves. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Bryan Easterday.
And what are we speaking about today? Normalizing sickness in our society. Now, this is a topic that I've been wanting to get into for quite some time. And before I set that up, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button real quick and give us a like as well. We really appreciate that. So, setting the stage here, I'm going to open with a quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti. "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And this is a quote that has passed around in memes like quite a lot. It's a very popular, but I think it's extremely true. To the point that we have a very rich episode planned out here. So what we're going to be getting into is observing the ways in which we've accepted and even come to glorify extremely unhealthy habits, mindsets, and lifestyles in our society. And then it conversely actually belittle, shame, antagonize, and ridicule anyone who dares point out, what's wrong with reality. So that's essentially what we're looking at. Bryan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so we're just going to be delving into a few different examples, though we're far from going to be hitting on all of them. There's plenty more that we won't even be touching on, but it can be behaviors in society that really just seem like the smallest, the tiniest little behavior that is totally normalized. But when you actually look at it through the perspective of cosmic law and sovereignty, you can then see that those are actually extremely unhealthy behaviors, but nobody dare question them because they seem and appear normal. So that's, we're just going to be, diving into a lot of these kind of different examples and different areas that, some of them may very much trigger people, but, just please, take your time and listen closely to what we're actually saying, and hear us out. We do try to always bring a very balanced and holistic perspective to different topics, and especially ones that tend to be controversial.
Right, absolutely. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to announce that the Wizard Factory podcast is now available on all of the major platforms: Spotify, iTunes. We're featured on Anchor, so you can find all of our links there and select your preferred podcast. But this, I've gotten a lot of feedback from our viewers that say that they would much more likely follow more of our work if they were able to listen to the audio podcast, say when they're commuting to and from work and things like that, cutting vegetables in the kitchen or something like that. So we're hoping that will help people be able to stay more up to date on our episodes. So check those links out down below and follow us on your preferred platforms, Spotify and iTunes being the most popular. So getting into it here. The first one I think is kind of just the lowest hanging fruit, very obvious that most people can see, is the culture of obesity and gluttony and a taste-driven diet. So those three kind of all sort of go together. You have, the body positivity sentiments, which by all means, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with promoting a healthy sense of self and feeling good and loving yourself in your own skin. But, I fully support that. But at the same time, you have to call obesity what it is. It's unhealthy. It's deadly. It needs to be called what it is, and that's really kind of what the theme of all of these are going to be, is things that are masquerading as something that's just fine and it's great, and it's actually really unhealthy, and they need to be called out as such, or else we can't even begin to heal, because acknowledging the problem is the first step to any kind of problem solving. So
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I mean, and obesity is a great example in the sense that like it very much is something that can be very deadly. It creates a huge strain on society, economically, even just trying to treat it and all the other myriad of diseases that obesity starts to, that tend to come along with it, like diabetes and heart disease and, all the other, different symptoms and diseases we see come along when people, they're much higher risk for those when they are obese. You can see that that weight, that's very hard on your organs. It's crushing your organs and your joints and your knees. There's more back problems. So it does, when you actually look at it objectively, from kind of like a scientific perspective here, you can very much see that it's a huge economic strain on society, as well as if someone is in a state of being unhealthy, you are not doing them any favors by lying to them because you're afraid to hurt their feelings. The best, like, and I'm not saying just go around like telling people that or whatever, but if we as a society can objectively see that there's a state that the human body like is when it's in a healthy state, and there are symptoms of when it's not, and obesity is one of those. Um, so being able to look at that and see that it's not because you're trying to judge people or anything like that. It's, the greatest act of care would be to actually get the proper information out there. So instead of just conforming to someone's victim mentality of, oh, it's just my genes, there's nothing I can do about it, they can then choose to recognize, like, oh, there's an issue, but I can work to resolve that. Or I don't want to continue this because I want to be around to see my children or my grandchildren, or whatever it may be. I don't want to die early, so I need to fix this problem. Whereas if you operate from the mindset of normalizing that, people will continue to become more and more unhealthy. They're going to die sooner. They're going to have more disease, and there's just more and more strain will be put on society in that way.
Right, exactly. And that's what's important to understand why we're coming from this perspective, is because simply by not calling sickness what it is, you are acting as an enabler of their toxic and self-destructive behaviors. That's just a fact. And I also
Mm-hmm.
want to stress that, you know, as we're moving through all of these different aspects, these are things that in some ways we're doing to ourselves, but it's also being really pushed on us by the social engineers. And I mean, it's a very common sense perspective. This isn't just some far-fetched conspiracy theory. You can look and research this. All the advertising and media and like food and all those big countries that are not countries, companies, corporations that are serving all the needs, medicine and things like that of humanity. All the basic needs are are owned by a monopoly of a very small group of people that all go to secret meetings together and talk about who knows what. That's sure, that's speculation, but I mean, seriously, use common sense. These are just facts. This stuff is just how the world is set up. So this is
Mm-hmm.
being done to us to a degree. I'm not encouraging a full-on victim mindset, but understand that you're being waged a war upon. You are an enemy of invisible people that want to destroy you, not even on a physical, but a metaphysical and a spiritual level. And it's very important to come to terms with that and understand that, because otherwise you're just oblivious cannon fodder. So
Mm-hmm.
look at how this obesity, is being pushed through advertising, you know, uh, just like the normalization of what is a healthy portion or what's cool to, the sexy race car driver or the beach babe chugging, glorified corn juice with Coca-Cola written on the side of it. You know what I mean? Like it's very obvious. And even the restaurants, you order a food, you order a it's like this massive platter, like it's like a week's worth of food, and that's just a normal portion.
Well, and I think the looking at kind of the taste driven diet, which is a good way to put it, is that the vast majority of people in the West, especially here in the States, um, very much their diet you could be classified as that. By they're really just going off of whatever they think tastes good. But as you said, their bodies, their taste buds have really been conditioned uh, to a certain extent to where they're very much looking for things that are heavy in sugars,
Hmm.
and other things like that.
Chemicals,
Whereas
flavor enhancers, things like that.
right, whereas if you shift your mindset and operate from the perspective of you're eating because you understand that's nutrition that you're going to be putting into your body, that that should be the first and foremost uh, thing that you're taking into consideration when choosing something for your diet, with taste then being something that comes after that. And it's not to say that eating healthy has to be, like taste totally horrible. It doesn't. In fact, that, I found once I started really shifting my diet and like going vegan like a few years ago, I really noticed that the foods and the things that I were cooking I found to have a lot more diversity of flavor and things like that. It's just a learning process of learning all the different things and the healthy way to eat and what nutrients are in what. And yeah, that does take research and it takes time and practice. But just start by consciously making that decision to first and foremost choose that you're not going to put something in your body just because it's serving a quick fix or a quick urge of, oh, this just tastes really good, rather that you're looking to put something in your body because you understand it needs that fuel and it needs a certain type of fuel in order to operate like properly.
Right. It always struck me as odd. Well, not always. When I first kind of had my nutrition awakening, so to speak, and I was really realizing just how bad our food, our normal food, the standard American diet was. Uh, the language, because I was also, just kind of getting into that stuff too. The way we use words, and when people say, "Oh, good food," like that place has really good food, most of the time to the average person, they're talking about their food tastes great. It has absolutely nothing to do with the nutritious value of it. That they
Hmm.
prioritize the taste of food like like the nutrition isn't even hardly an afterthought. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But like you said, it's a great point that kind of strikes me to consider there, that comparing a Coca-Cola to like a really well crafted meal full of fresh ingredients and herbs and spices, like one thing tastes good just because it's sugar. That's it. Your brain is just like versus the complexity of different natural flavors coming from the earth done in a very refined process. Being more health minded makes you a better cook. I found, because you are actually having to work with that, the alchemy of food.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. One, I also think, a lot of that, what plays into that taste driven diet is a convenience driven diet as well, where
Yeah,
people will go for what's quick, what's easy. And it's understandable. Like, I know, like, even with, especially like if you have a family and kids, it can get like really, it's a lot of work to cook, 3 times a day or to do whatever.
yeah,
So you have to kind of get, creative in this, because, especially in our society, we're so busy with so many different things that just having time to do that as well as everything else that needs done can get very difficult. So a lot of people, just out of convenience, will default to just getting something that's pre-made, or just ordering food, from some, fast food restaurant, or whatever it may be.
mhm,
So again, that kind of takes, you have to bring that awareness in it, and you have to consciously make that choice and effort to do it. So it might require like maybe meal prepping a little bit, or planning a meal where when you are cooking, you just make a large amount so it can last you for a couple meals, and then you can have leftovers that you can just reheat kind of quicker, or whatever it may be. There's just different things to look at, but very poor diet choice overall is something just very much very normalized in our society, and again, especially here in the States, or somewhere in like the Midwest. Like I'm here in Wichita, Kansas, which I think is like the second most obese city in the United States, right behind Kansas City.
mhm.
So I mean, it's, when you see the vast majority of the population here, like well over half of them are, like obese. It's definitely a major problem.
Yeah, and man, like, yeah, just this one alone, we could do a whole episode on. It's very, very huge aspect of what's going on. But moving on to the next one, looking at the mental health, is just as important, if not more, via the law of mentalism. Things like the normalization of these anxiety disorders and antisocial tendencies. You see a lot of memes that really normalize, like, like that's just your personality or something, versus no, that's trauma that you're carrying that you're not dealing with, and you're just turning it into a part of your identity so you don't have to deal with it or fix it. um, Depression, it's far too common regardless. It's just a basic thing almost that it shouldn't be so common. Like it's one of those indicators that there's something wrong on a very large scale, that there's this many people that literally have suicidal thoughts, and they have no desire to live, when the truth of the matter is that life is so full of opportunity and beautiful experiences to be had and growth to be gone through. And it's just such a tragedy that that is such a common mindset when it's so detached from the truth. And again, we've said, we recently did another episode called Beyond the Padded Walls, where we got into mental illness specifically, and that was one of the real themes that you can observe, is that all mental illness are some form of detachment or disconnection from reality. And that's how you can use as a metric to each one of these that we're hitting on, is that there's some kind of distortion happening in the mind versus what is actually occurring.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and another kind of type of mental illness that we see, that that it's an issue that's really big, especially in romantic relationships here in the West things. But that's codependence, and I think we can see this really play out in the interplay between the narcissist and the empath,
Hmm.
where really both, that's something that's very much, I mean, you fucking see that all over every line that, everyone and their dog is an empath now. Or whatever, where I really think those are just being, very much misunderstood, to the sense they're both coming from some kind of a wounded place, or a place of not understanding boundaries. That's where, especially in the context of these two, boundaries would be the issue for both sides of that. But that's something that, again, that's very much normalized, especially like on the empath side of things. There's people will say that they're just so sensitive, or they just can't go around, or they don't want to be around people because then they just feel totally drained or whatever. So then they use that as an excuse to never go around anything, or if there's any kind of situation that's anything other than calm, they just can't stand to be around it. Like, oh, that's too negative for me. They get very much
Right.
into that new agey kind of vibe, and I myself, like, I'm the type of person that, like, I do like my isolation. If I get around a lot of people, I do kind of get like anxious and things. I can get very overwhelmed, uh, but I don't just like use that to get into victim mentality. I just try to recognize it and work on it the best I can. But when that's normalized, like, oh, you're just an empath, it's your gift or whatever, so you just, it's
Hmm.
okay, so you just need to, if you go on a lot of like, uh of kind of neo-pagan discussion groups or something, and you see a lot of people that are like Wiccans in there, you see a lot of this of, oh, you just need to wear silver all the time. And it's not about, oh, you just need to work on your boundaries and your sense of self, like empower yourself so you don't have to, and I'm not to say that there's other things that like can't be helpful with those things. I'm not discounting those, but I very rarely ever see anyone give the answer to a person asking this kind of question of, oh, you just need to work on your own boundaries, like in your sense of self, and not allowing yourself to be influenced by other people's mental state. Because
Hmm.
that's really, if that's the position you're taking, that's a victimhood mentality. You're allowing the state of the world to determine how you feel internally. Like, just drop that shit and take back your power.
Hmm.
That's going to be the most helpful thing you can do if that's something you feel like, you struggle with, and what, it was in my case at least.
Right. I think you really, hit the nail on the head when you said regarding the lack of boundaries, because that's what the empath is they haven't developed within themselves a proper shielding from other people, any kind of external influences. Really, you could look at it that way. And of course, other people's energy is one of the biggest influences on each other. We're all kind of like, you know, and I'm the same way too. I have those tendencies, but like you said, I don't let that just. I still go out and I still do things, and but it's funny that I hadn't realized as I was typing these notes that the antisocial thing that I just mentioned in the previous one relates so closely to this again.
Hmm.
You like you said, it's very common now to just be identified as, oh, I'm just an empath and I don't know how to shield myself from other influences, so I just kind of either avoid things or walking around as just this poor, like kind of a mess of a person.
Hmm.
Neither of those things are really healthy or an answer or solution to that situation.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like that codependent archetypal situation of the narcissist and the empath, you can really see that being displayed in the mass psychic weather by the ridiculously, large popularity of Joker and Harley Quinn, that is portraying that quintessential type of relationship. And you see how popular those characters are, and all the like deranged young girls that want to dress up like Harley Quinn and go out on Halloween and stuff like that. It's it's indicating these are the things that you can observe in people's behavior that is a symptom of a larger, deeper kind of issue on the mental psychological sphere.
Hmm.
And going on beyond just I mean, Joker and Harley Quinn, that's just one example, but you can see it absolutely saturated in things like pop and rap and country music. The songs that are portraying like this very, and romance movies and novels and things like that are portraying this very toxic codependent version of love that it glorifies egocentrism egocentrism or the self-serving mindset, and or unhealthy selflessness, which is the other, the feminine version of the imbalance there of just like, I'll give you everything, or like, you're my whole world. Like sentiments like that is very normal in love songs, but that, if you really think about that, like, why would you want to be with someone that you're literally the only thing they have going on in their life and you're their whole world? Like, that's very unhealthy. You need to go find yourself and what your purpose is, not find that purpose in another person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and country music's an excellent example of that. I mean, there's if you want to talk about codependence and things like that, that is a great place to observe that. If
I
you
don't
look
know,
at a lot
Brian.
of
I don't think excellent and country music should ever go in the same sentence.
in the same sense. Well, like I said, luckily, I don't know if people know this, but if it all works out okay though, because if you play the song backwards, they get all their shit back. So
And their dog comes back
yeah,
alive.
comes back to this. but we can also see it, like I said, like you mentioned in movies, like like movies, especially like oh, what's that fucking channel called? Oh, like the Lifetime movies and things like
Oh
that.
God,
My
yes.
God, like if you see generations of girls now that were kind of like raised watching that stuff,
Hmm.
and a
Soap
lot of
operas,
them are
probably.
extreme, yeah, in extremely toxic relationships because it creates this idea of what romance and what love should be like, and all of this crap, and then that then creates an expectation, in their subconscious and their unconscious mind of that's how it should be, and if it's not like that, if it's a relationship like any real relationship, then somehow that means there's something wrong or whatever,
Yeah.
and then you see them falling into the, oh, this person was just a narcissist who didn't love me or didn't do, there was a lot of that goes on, and I think a lot of that comes from these kind of mindsets or underlying assumptions or normalized behaviors and expectations in society in regards to some of these subjects
Mhm.
that then lead to these false conclusions.
Right, like the princess programming, that sort of
Yeah.
entitlement, like, oh, if a man can't take care of me, he ain't even worth my time, and that kind of mindset. I mean, that is a very, very common mindset among typically younger women, but
Right.
luckily I'm not in the dating scene, and I'm very happily not married. Don't have to worry about that so much, but it's a nightmare. For those of you out there still dating, I feel for you because it is not a pretty picture.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, just even kind of like Specifically in the context of relationships, I do think that there's a lot of behavior that's normalized in regards to how people treat each other, but even like within
Yeah.
one thing I notice is kind of like double standards in this with society. There's a lot of double standards that are very toxic behaviors that are normalized. One thing you'll see, for example, like you could see something like everybody's heard like a girl or something. They say like if a guy were to cheat on them something, what's like one of the first threats that you'll hear them say? Not that most of them actually mean on doing it, but you'll hear them say it. Like, what? Oh, I'm going to cut his dick off. Very normalized thing. You'll hear that.
Mm.
But if a man was to say like, oh, if my girlfriend cuts on me, like I'm going to cut her body up and mutilate her, all of a sudden the guy sounds like a bit of a psycho, right?
Right.
Because he would be. Uh, Behaviors like that, or if it's very much taboo for like a man to hit a woman. Nobody
Mhm.
should ever be hit. But a lot of times it's kind of very normalized, or people will even think it's funny if like a woman gets mad at her boyfriend or something, and then like slaps the shit out of him, or throws something at him, or does whatever that like I've been in a relationship where she got very violent at times.
Mhm.
But that's kind of then normalized, and it's very easy for them to get away with that because the court systems and just society in general will almost always on the default kind of take the side of the woman, especially if like kids are involved, and then like you have a kid with and you're in a relationship with a woman like that. They will very much um, use that child and the threat of the state to control and manipulate you. But that's something that is very too fucking common. There's a lot of men I know who have been through this experience and are going through this experience, but it's something that's very, very normalized. That's okay to do, and
Mhm.
that's how it should be. And that, and we see the state wanting to encourage that as well because it really leads to that breakdown of the family
Mhm.
unit. It sets the man up for a position of, oh, you have to, a lot of times if you get stuck with one of these women, you kind of just have to do almost, you're almost afraid to not do what they tell you because you're afraid of losing your child or something like
Mhm.
that. Or having them, call the cops and, press false assault charges or something. There's a lot of men that go through that. But it's kind of just joked about a lot in society where a lot of people won't actually look at that side of things.
Right. And I was just thinking about like the memes I've been seeing a lot more of too, that women will share about me when I see a toxic guy that's emotionally unavailable, and it's like indicating that they're super
Yeah.
turned on, or want them insatiably or something like that. Those that general, or like when he has 7 kids from 5 women and has no car and blah blah blah, and it's like a chick with her legs spread or something, that sort of thing is. And then
Right.
the chicks are sharing this shit like, oh my god, it's so me. And it's like they're self-aware that there's something wrong with them, but it's almost like instead of dealing with it, they just post memes and like, oh, this is just how I am, like, oh god, what's wrong with me, haha, like, just it's they're not really taking it that seriously.
100, 100.
Yeah. Or like the popularity of the show and book 50 Shades of Grey, I think, is a very interesting depiction of like, I get the allure to a woman. A woman wants, the feminine wants to be ravaged by the masculine, but the authentic masculine, the true masculine, not the toxic, inauthentic version. And but that's what that show is about. Is that guy Gray or whatever? He's a total piece of shit. That's the exact opposite type of guy that any woman should be submitting to, and giving that sort of like I said, submission, or just complete giving oneself over to, for that,
Mhm.
a borderline abusive type of thing, and then getting turned on by that. Like, look, that should tell you something.
Yeah, definitely a lot of trauma in society that I think things are playing
Oh yeah.
out in ways that are unhealthy. And it's not, and to caveat, and that's not to like say anyone like in the kink scene or something like there's anything wrong with that. We're speaking about the specific context of that book and the psychological state of being like the unhealthy psychological state that is involved in the characters within
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
almost any of these things can be excusable in some sort of moderation. Alcohol, for example, where was the next point we're going to get into. A lot of these things, I won't say like there's a healthy amount of mental illness. I don't know, maybe.
Good to be a little crazy, you know.
Yeah. Jack Nicholson comes to mind, and scenes where his hair's all like, yeah, like, yeah, but a lot of these things that we're going to get into, there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with some of these things. It's where it's not even the thing itself; it's where they're coming from. It's the motivation, what's driving these behaviors that is what needs to get kind of looked at a little bit deeper. So yeah, the next one we're going to get into is alcohol and pharmaceuticals. While drugs or substances, whatever you want to call plant teachers that actually elevate consciousness, are highly criminalized and prohibited, these absolutely self-destructive, mind-numbing, soul-destroying substances are literally being shoved by our throats at every corner on billboards and commercials and Bud Light and up for whateverville, or I mean, it's absolutely out of control how
Mhm.
ridiculous it is. And again, this is one of those things where if you're really paying attention, it's blatantly obvious that this is not just how it is. It's being pushed on us for a reason.
Mhm. Well, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is one of the largest industries out there on the planet, and the alcohol industry is very large itself as well,
Mm.
billions of dollars in both of those. So there's a lot of motivation from corporations and social engineers to get people to stay in a traumatized state. So they are consuming things like this as a way of escaping their reality and escaping all their
and not
issues rather
and
than
not healing.
and not healing rather than doing the work. So, that leads to a lot of that, this can tie in with with the pharmaceuticals and say like depression, where the antidepressants or needing to take anxiety pills or sleeping pills, like that is so fucking normalized in our society. It's not even funny. It's everywhere rather than just trying to get to the root of the problem. It's all that kind of band-aid mentality of just trying to cover up and treat the symptoms without actually getting to the root of the problem, which a lot of these can very much be tied in with trauma. Like when we talk about that a lot on our show, but a lot of our issues in society, both within ourselves, but as a collective, they're going to be rooted in some kind of trauma or some kind of disconnect from reality, as Logan mentioned earlier.
Right, and I mean, pull back even further and look at that from the mentalism scale of left brain and right brain. The West is very much leaning towards a more left brain mentality, and you see this especially in things like technology and medicine, because like the Western medicine treats the body like it's just a machine. If there's something wrong, you just come in there with a knife and cut it out. It's not about addressing the cause. It's just about like removing the anomaly or whatever. Like that's such a left brain Western mindset, whereas the right brain is the feminine, which is the essence of things, and that's the plane of causality versus the plane of manifested results that is in the physical. um, so yeah, very good point, tying the pharmaceutical and the alcohol aspect, which is masquerading as medicine, but it's nothing more than self-destructive coping mechanisms that and another point that I wanted to make too with a lot of these things is I'm saying, this is not just happening to us, it's being done to us. Some people try to excuse what's happening in a way, not that they're saying it's good, but they're just like, oh, it's just greed. That's a cop out. I think that I hear a little too much. It's not just about the money. The money to these people, these fucking people, these psychopaths that have so much power you can't even imagine, in terms of what change they can create on a mass scale on this planet through the institutions that do exist. The power is largely illusory and in the mind, but it's also real. It's kind of a a bit of a paradox. But my point is, these people don't just care about money. They care more about power, domination, and control. The money is just a nice thing that comes with the package. You know,
Mhm.
as far as what motivates these people is what I'm trying to say. So
Mhm.
the money's nice and all, but that's not really why. It's about spiritual obliteration of you and me. That's what we're really talking about here.
And this ties in a little bit with what we were talking about earlier. It's kind of like reality TV, like a lot of those movies, specifically, but reality TV. There's a lot of shows like I'm trying to think of. I don't fucking watch them, so it's hard to think of any off the top of my head. Yeah,
No,
or yeah, the Real Housewives or shit, yeah, shit like that.
Bachelor, Pregnant in 16, like all this. I mean,
Yeah.
dude, I have a real personal disdain for reality TV. To me,
Mhm.
somebody who actually gets something out of that is somebody who enjoys putting a sewage pipe in their brain and just turning it on full blast and filling their mind full of just junk. Like it's such a soul destroying medium to get into. Just stop it. Like it's ironic that it's called reality TV because it should be called Escape from Reality TV or Unreality TV because it's anything but, and it's there to just like, I don't know. It's blatant mind control programming is what it is, because here's why. It glorifies the egocentric mindset. It glorifies putting money over things like honor, friendship, loyalty, like true human values. And it showcases rampant entitlement and spoiled brat behavior. That's what
Mhm.
it does. Name any fucking reality TV show. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's
But yeah, absolutely. One, I mean, it's like, if you consider, like, my son's mother, she likes like a lot of those shows, and she used to like want me to watch them with her, and I felt like, my brain was being scratched out because they're just so terrible. Like, the people, their behavior is just so fucking deplorable. They're I mean, if you look at the intelligence of those people, like, they're just fucking stupid. Like, they're absolute morons. But yet people are just so entertained by them, and they love seeing all that drama, and they love seeing all the fighting. And the reason is it because it distracts them from their own bullshit. If
the
they see
drama and
someone that
fighting that's happening
right,
inside them.
right, if they see someone that's like so terrible on the TV, then all of a sudden they can be like, well, I'm not that bad. So then they
Exactly.
feel a little bit better about themselves, enough to distract themselves to be like, oh, I don't have issues like that person, so there's nothing for me to work on. And then they just keep feeding off of that. And what people may not realize here is these shows are actually designed to create a chemical reaction in your brain. That's the reason they leave certain parts, like really dramatic parts, like they'll hype it up and then cut off to a commercial. So what you're doing is you're getting like adrenaline, you're getting chemicals released in your brain that are giving you this excited, this euphoric feeling. And then what do? They cut you off.
And it makes
So
you
then
want
you're feeding for it. And then people be like, oh, I've at least got to finish this episode. Oh, I got to see what happens with this. You'll hear that statement a lot with people watching the shows. Oh, I got to we'll see what happens with this person. It's they're being like, they're literally addicted to that chemical rush in their own brain, and they don't realize they're being manipulated on such a mass scale like that. But that's absolutely what's happening.
Yeah, it's like a heroin dealer that wants to get some hot little young thing addicted by giving them little bits at a time and then like pulling it, withholding it. And then that makes them turn into a fiend. And then they'll literally just do whatever you ask so that
Hmm.
just for a little taste. That's how they
Right.
write these shows. It's a formula. Okay. This isn't
Hmm.
just one show that's corrupt or whatever. Like across the board, this is how it is. And I also think that it does something to fuel the misanthropia or the human loathing of our fellow man in the minds of people by depicting humanity as depraved. I mean, that's what people get off on in these reality shows, like hoarders and people with weird like that, like to eat cat hair and shit. It makes them feel like, oh well, oh god, like they get off on kind of scorning that person and thinking, wow, what a whack job, and it makes them feel good about themselves while reinforcing this mindset that you hear more and more of, just like, oh, I hate people, or human beings are a disease or a virus or something like that. I mean,
Hmm.
that's what Agent Smith says to Morpheus in the Matrix, that human beings are a virus. So when you're thinking like that, you're thinking like an agent. Just consider that for a second.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the next little kind of area we want to look at was, and we got like kind of two different perspectives to look at this from, but the conspiracy theorist. Um, so the first kind of perspective would be like, we can look and see that, it's actually classified as a mental illness in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. But how that can very much be used as a form of gaslighting, like simply classifying someone and saying that they have a mental illness because they question certain events or certain narratives and they may not go along with the official story. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a mental illness. That's definitely a form of gaslighting. On the flip side of that, though, there are a lot of conspiracy theorists that very much do have a lot of mental illness, that they have a an extremely dark worldview or a doom and gloom worldview, which we talked about in an episode called Beyond Tunnel Vision, Tunnel Vision Trapped in Doom and Gloom or something like that, where we really looked at the mindset of a person who just sees everything as a conspiracy, that we're all just slaves on this planet and that we don't have any control, and it's just the the deep state and these dark elite that can do whatever they want and there's nothing we can do about it. That also isn't a very healthy mindset either, but that's something that over recent years we've kind of seen very much normalized. Or you'll see the funny memes, like especially around holidays, you'll see them come out like, oh, being a conspiracy, now I got to go with my sheeple family and they're all going to think, it's kind of like normalized that idea that you should just be raging or at war with everyone who doesn't see the world the same way you do.
Mm,
um,
very well said.
and that's a very unhealthy way to operate. So I think we can see normalization from both of those perspectives as being something
Mm.
that's not really coming from a balanced state of looking at things.
Right. And then, taking this back to what I said earlier about using as a metric for each of these, uh, qualifying a mental illness as some form of distortion or detachment from reality, this is a great way to see that in action, because first, conspiracy theorists are gaslighted simply for questioning the reality that we're being given by the news and other media outlets that control how we perceive what's happening in the world. But then that in and of itself can become so out of balance and out of whack that their own reality becomes distorted to the point that they can't see anything beyond that worldview. And that's really what we get into in that episode, Doom and Gloom. We'll put the link in here. That it goes beyond that balance point into the realm where they can't see anything, but the world is just hostile and everything's trying to kill them, basically. And we're being poisoned
Hmm.
from every angle and, all that sort of stuff.
Right. Where you see people get into like, like the flat Earth fucking people would be a great example of this, or the QAnon people. A lot of interplay between those, but you know, that very much you can see that's the side of where the conspiracies has went into the state of being no longer functioning from a healthy perspective. That and that's kind of again very much normalized, like a lot of the unhealthy
Mhm.
behaviors in those groups. The flat earth one is a great example, where they'll just come and spam people's pages, with unsolicited stuff. They won't ever actually make, they'll just spam a bunch of memes and just regurgitated things. That's a very much normalized thing within that community. Or one of the things they like to do, call everybody globe cards. Like that's, I mean, my fucking god, like not only is it just horribly clever, but like, I mean, it just goes to show you the state of mind of what's going on there, in a person that's doing that,
Mhm.
and that it very much is coming from a place of just trauma, and they've been so traumatized that they now, they mistrust the world so much that now everything has turned into conspiracy, to the point that they can be very, very easily misled by just giving them some information in an area that they're probably not that familiar with.
Right, and I think that's a really good way to observe as well, like you said, in the behavior of people like these radicalized theorists that get obsessed with some or a couple of ideas that like the Earth is flat or that Hitler was the good guy, or even to be frank, vegans. And Bryan is a vegan, and I kind of oscillate between vegetarian and vegan, uh, but I don't even disagree with it, but look at the way most vegans behave. We're bringing this up and putting light on the similar between militant vegans, militant flat earthers, whatever, is very, very similar. These are people that are leashed out and just feeding on that negative energy, that conflict, and that egotism of I'm right and you're just stupid because you don't agree with me kind of thing. And ironically, vegans are kind of the like conspiracy theorist of the animal world, because if you become that, what drives people to that oftentimes is a conspiracy against animals that they believe is morally wrong, and are identifying as somebody who is against that. But like, why is it so far-fetched to think that farm animals are being conspired against and herded and butchered and harvested, but human beings are somehow exempt from that? Just a
Mhm.
little tidbit to think about. But yeah.
One, in regards to that, I think it's well, you said it really well earlier in the episode, where you said, like, they'll find some of these behaviors or these traumas, uh, in whatever area it is, and what happens is, because of the trauma, they then allow themselves to latch their ego and their identity onto that. So then it becomes obsessive, or that's all they think about. Or anyone who doesn't identify that is somehow a person that's just, you know, a total piece of shit, and part of the satanic system. So then they can't associate with them, or whatever it may be. Like, if you're taking any kind of a belief to such an extreme that you don't accept anybody outside of that, or that is literally where all of your psychic energy is poured into, then that's a sign that it's coming from a traumatic place. There's something there, and then it's not that whatever that thing is inherently wrong, or anything like that. But if you're allowing it to become the whole of your identity, and that's where all your psychic energy is being poured into, well, then there's something to look at with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I just realized there is an actual documentary called Cowspiracy, so that that goes
Oh,
to show. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, the next one we're going to get into here is looking at extreme body modification. And here's another example of something, we're not saying there's something wrong with it inherently, or, like a piercing or something like that. But really, we're talking about people that like want to become cats, or, like the tiger guy, or people that like split their tongue in half so that they can have a snake tongue and stuff like that. I mean, like, okay, it's your body, true. We respect sovereignty. That is your property to do with what you will. But just as much as it's an unhealthy behavior to suck down Coca-Cola, even though it's your right to do, I'm going to still tell you, that's going to kill you, right? Um, I think that the a lot of these examples, people are acting out essentially some sort of self-punishment, or a pain pleasure association that isn't necessarily healthy. And of course it is objectively body mutilation of some form. So we're really talking about the really extreme cases specifically, and what is probably motivating somebody to do this to themselves.
Right. Yeah. We're not talking about just someone, getting a regular piercing, or, people that have, like, I have tattoos. Um, but, there are people that very much take things to quite extremes, to where they go through like major surgeries or whatever, in order to do things that they're actually putting themselves at risk, or,
Hmm.
potential for physical harm by going through some of these procedures.
Hmm.
that's probably an indication that they're obviously they're trying to change their self, their image. So there's something about themselves that they didn't really like, that they were disconnected from. So then this is a way of then trying to replace or to fill that void. Um,
Right. And like it's coming back to that distortion of reality because this person, like the example that I was thinking of was for those who watch the show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. There's the character Maureen Ponderosa who is spending her alimony checks on body surgery to become a cat, and so she gets like these cheeks and like long claws and all this kind of stuff, and she literally starts to look every time you see her, she's more like cat like, but she also I think she has like toys she plays with and uses a litter box and all this kind of stuff. So it's like in their mind they are a cat, and that is a distortion of reality. Like that is a separation. There's something wrong there, and
right.
especially somebody who puts that kind of money into actually changing their body.
You could probably get a tail on there. I don't see
Yeah.
why not. I love that's a great example because like in the show you end up seeing that her disconnect from reality ultimately ends up getting her killed. Like as they see, in the episode where they're all in court, and Dennis, they're getting questioned by the detectives for like they're trying
Mhm.
to figure out like who killed her or whatever.
Right.
And she was really just dancing around like a cat on the top of a building and fell off and died. So it's just so
Oh, geez, that's great.
so it's a funny example, but on a serious note, it's a good way to kind of highlight how that kind of disconnect from reality can actually you know uh, end up not being something that's very good. uh, some other things that we see normalized in our society, especially here in the West, and we've talked about this before on our show in our episode, Healing the Wounded Warrior, is circumcision, as well as spanking. Those are things that are seen just as normal, no big deal medical procedure kind of thing. And nobody ever thinks twice of it when people don't actually realize it. It is actually a major medical procedure. There's little boys who die from it every single year, even here in the United States, and it's totally unnecessary. It's
Mhm.
something that has been brought on and pushed under a myriad of different reasons, anything from trying to keep men from masturbating as much to the idea that it keeps things cleaner. But where it really comes from and is rooted in is in the Abrahamic traditions. Uh, you know, you can see that it's a Jewish practice, but that's something that it's a very traumatic behavior. The idea of mutilating any person without their consent. Any person with common sense should be like, well, no, that's not right. That's not okay to do. Um, but yet we see this as something very normalized in our society, to the point that even like people who may not be cut or whatever will like kind of maybe feel like they're going to be made fun of or something like that,
Mhm.
because there was a kid when I was in school. I remember him. you know uh, I remember this coming up when we were in like middle school or something like that. That he didn't know that like circumcision was a thing. He's like, well, what's that? And all the other boys in the school were like, well, you don't know what that is? Like that didn't happen to you? Like, so I mean, it's a very traumatic procedure that's then, and they've done studies on this. They've done MRI brain scans and CTI scans, as well as there's some interesting evidence, in regards to violence and criminal activity,
Mhm.
with males that have been circumcised. So, again, a very destructive behavior, but that is very much seen as something normal in our society. And a lot of times, if you question it, people will, you'll get a lot of rage from a lot of people. I noticed, especially with a lot of mothers and mothers who have chosen to circumcise their children. I really, you'll see a lot of backlash from them because they don't want to have to admit that they actually did something that, one, wasn't their right, and two, is actually harmful to the
Mm.
child.
Completely agree with you. Yeah, definitely check out that episode, Healing the Wounded Warrior, parts 1 and 2 with Greg Pop Nicholas. That was one of our earlier episodes. Um, but yeah, I mean, you could go on and on. It's scientifically, proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it permanently changes the chemical brain structure of an infant that is cut like that. So, and like this kind of segues into the genital mutilation, and the previous point of body modification is the topic of transgenderism. And this is not a topic that we are uh, approaching from a callous perspective. We actually intend on doing a whole episode just on transgenderism and getting into that, because I think it is something that needs to be talked about. And obviously looking at this from the natural law and sovereignty perspectives. But just to touch on it, it is a form of not accepting reality of the body that they were born into, essentially, to the point that they need a surgery of some kind. Like any other instance, a surgery is when something's wrong. You cut out a cancer or something like that. There's no other reason you would need to cut or modify your body unless you saw that there was something wrong with it, or didn't, wrong as in like what is what I don't want. Reality doesn't match there. And so, yeah, again, we're going to get into that a lot more in depth, but we just kind of wanted to mention that in passing in this one. But like look out for that episode at some point. And then, of course, getting into some of the biggest ones is looking at statism and religion, which of course statism is a religion, but just to segregate the two into political and spiritual religions that normalize gaslighting and outright violence, whether threatening your physical person via kidnapping, extortion, and jail, or you on a spiritual level sending your soul to hell to be tormented forever. Not very pleasant stuff. So just looking at the normalization of the aspects of these that are so horrific and barbaric, kind of starting with statism. One thing you can really see this is how nonchalantly people utter the words "there ought to be a law," because they don't realize when they say that what they're actually saying, or what they're implying or invoking with their words, is that I believe that that person right there ought to be threatened or acted upon with violence because they did a thing that I don't like, regardless whether they're harming anyone or actually creating a crime themselves as a victim. There ought to be a law. There ought to be an arbitrary dictate written on paper that says that if somebody sneezes too close to this building, that they can be fined. Or it's absolutely absurd. And I think people need to be more conscious of the words that they're uttering.
Yeah, one, like with statism, we can see that like taxes, like theft on a mass scale, something that is totally normalized and accepted, but it's fucking wrong. We can see that with when police pull over a car for something like speeding or seatbelt. Oh, that's just a normal thing. That's just them. But it's
Right.
accepted, even though everybody knows it's a bunch of fucking bullshit. That they're
person
just
is under duress.
Yeah, like they're just predators that are out there preying off of people. They're not there for your safety, And if you, we did some episodes called The Thin Blue Lie, where we really looked at the psychopathic and predatory mindset and nature of the police and agents of the state, And then getting in with religion, we talk about a lot on the show here, but especially with Christianity, there's a lot in that belief system that is extremely normalized and accepted, that is some gaslighted version of history, and extremely unhealthy. I mean, you could look at the belief in original sin, that we're all inherently evil and sinful. Like that's bullshit. That's something that is a normalized belief here in the West, but like it's the idea that all human beings, again, like they're this virus, it's this dark world view, um or that you need some kind of a savior to protect you or to save you from something, or the fact that you even need saved in the first place. These are very much normalized kind of concepts that we can see bleed into all the other areas of our society, but they're very unhealthy, and people don't like when you point it out. Like, I mean, if you say something about Jesus, people usually like lose their shit. Like, even a lot of anarchists, for some reason, have this really false notion and understanding of history as if he was like somehow, not that he existed at all, but even if he did, that he was somehow the first teacher of morality and natural law
Right.
and being kind to others. And like that's just so far from the fucking case. It shows you just how delusional people are, and that they really have accepted this gaslighted version of history because it's been the normal narrative for so fucking long now.
Right. The two statements or concepts or notions that can be highlighted about both of these religions is, with politics, people can't be trusted with freedom. That's that form of gaslighting of just like, oh, people are too wicked inherently to be trusted with freedom, yet somehow they're okay to be trusted with unlimited political power. That makes no sense. On the other side, from the religious or Christian standpoint, men are too wicked to save their own souls. Human beings are too corrupt and flawed on their own to redeem themselves. They need that to accept that outside. I mean, they literally use the words, accept Jesus as your savior. You're like, you're submitting, you're giving your power away when you accept Jesus as your savior, or somehow he's, giving you something you can't give yourself.
Yeah, or even just the fact that the behavior of Jehovah is normalized, that he
Hmm.
gives dictates and commands like a this all controlling entity, and then if you don't follow those, not only can he punish you, but the generation of children after you. He's very much a psychopathic God, but yet this gaslighted version of him has been normalized in society of, oh, it's a god of love and light, or oh, that's okay, yeah, like he loves everybody, but he'll burn you for eternity too, like
Hmm.
that's not a healthy mindset. That's not a belief system that creates any kind of positive growth or change.
Hmm.
And we've seen that in the world very much since it plunged us into the dark ages when it finally took control. To where it took us a long time just to get back to where we were in the classical pagan age, and in some regards, we're still not even there. Uh, a lot of our math, a lot of our discoveries and things that we use in the scientific world today are really based off of like Greek philosophers or things that were around 2000 years ago. There's not really a whole lot of new information out there as far as new discoveries or thought processes. It's really all just kind of based in this linear fashion off of previous discoveries. So we can see how that mindset really did just derail humanity's progress.
Exactly. And finally, what we can look at here is the fanaticism of political voters and their mindset on both sides. Sort of like Nazis on one side and Antifa on the other, of these hyper radicalized factions of the conservative and liberal false dichotomy bullshit. And you can really observe this mentally ill behavior on both sides. Neither are exempt, though they display themselves in kind of different ways. But I want you to consider here, like the left side, the stigma around, hashtag triggered and, my safe space and all this kind of hyper snowflake terminology that really showcases how common complex PTSD is among liberals and the Me Too movement. Like all these victimized, highly traumatized people tend to gravitate towards that side of things that is falling into that feminine imbalance of like drowning in your own emotions and unable to escape or process or heal in any kind of way, or or rather unwilling to, in most cases, I'd say. But
Mhm.
then on the other side, comparing that to the mindset or the general sentiment of conservatives of this kind of like fuck your feelings, go, liberal tears are so delicious, very disconnected from the feminine of care and empathy for one another. It's showcasing the typical, like the extreme narcissism and sociopathy common in the typical conservative mindset. It's very
Mhm.
interesting to see those two extremes that are both very, very unhealthy and not good.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting to see that you can kind of see how they're both coming from trauma, and it's just their different reactions.
Mm-hmm.
One goes into the left brain imbalance of the dominator mindset, because they've been so traumatized from being, having, a lot of conservatives are very Christian, leaning, and their whole religion has them submit. It has them become victims. It puts them in a place of powerlessness. So then that creates an imbalance in the left brain where they then want to become the dominator. Then you can see with the left, there's very much this right brain imbalance of wanting to become a victim, and then you can see this play out, and they like to play a game of like what we like to jokingly refer to as the victim Olympics, where they will, there's kind of this contest to see, which minority is the most oppressed, and the more of a group you can be in, like if you're a minority and a woman, and you're also trans, or whatever little like there's all these little subcategories and groups of oppressed people that they will try to identify with as many of those as they can, in a
And
way
then
of
they
trying to win the victim Olympics of, oh, I'm more oppressed than you, so then I have a reason to be so fucking emotionally unstable that I literally just scream every time I see a tweet from Trump or something that I don't
right.
agree with.
And
You
then
know?
they take that and they turn everything into some kind of a crusade about their standing up for their, the oppressed and people that have, that sort of thing. And like there's some value in that. Of course, yes, I think there should be champions of the abused and things like that, but not in this way, not when you take it to such an extreme that you build your entire identity around it, but then consequently, much like we talk about, when you're traumatized, it skews and distorts your worldview to the point where you can't see anything past it. And that's what we're getting at again is, you could, I could post something about like a gardening tip or something like that, and then some vegan would come in there and be like, uh, because you only eat vegetables and not animals, right? Like they'll turn anything into their argument or their vendetta, and
Looking for a
like
confirmation bias.
come completely out of the blue with something that has nothing to do with the topic, and make it about that. And then they're hoping that you disagree with them because then it's on and then they can lock into, you know, the white knight mode and all that kind of stuff. Like it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
clockwork,
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Another thing, like I said, just, I guess really kind of sum it up. We see it, in a lot of these interplay with each other. There's a lot of victimhood mentality, a lot of kind of codependent mindset. And really the answer for all of these are really stepping back into that place of sovereignty. And I think, one of the key things we could take out of this episode is that discernment of behaviors is very key. What are those behaviors? What are the motivations behind them, and what results do they actually produce in the reality field? that
mhm.
that discernment is where it really comes in, and discernment is the key for being able to see all the nuances in reality, so you don't get stuck into a black and white thinking like we've been talking about here.
Right. I love the use of the word reason because when you're reasoning or using logic and reason in that context, but when you think about the different use of the word, like what reason did you have for doing
Hmm.
that? It puts into concept the true meaning of that word is that it's the causal factors of you're tapping into natural law when you think about reasoning because you're peeling away those layers and kind of looking at the underlying causal factors of things, and being able to pick apart that, well, if this is true, then this can't be true because truth is consistent. It doesn't have contradictions in it. Only contradictions can exist in the mind, never in reality. So
Hmm.
using that discernment, that is your gift of the mind. The intellect is called the sword because it's splitting, right through. It's cutting through the bullshit and it's separating the wheat from the chaff.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, essentially, to just kind of wrap up here, we've just, as we mentioned, in the beginning, these are far from all the examples you can see. In fact, if there's any that you're thinking of that maybe we missed, in the comments below, let us know what you think or what are your views on some of the things that we hit on. what are some other areas that are your behaviors in society that might be, normalized, but that are actually a sign of sickness or trauma in the mind. We definitely want to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Mhm.
But we're far from hitting on all of them. So by all means, we're asking for your feedback as well. Let us know what we missed. Um, or if you have any other subjects or things you would like to hear us cover or talk about on the show, drop that in the comments as well.
Right. Yeah, that's the ironic thing about it, is that even for people like us who question things and observe from these perspectives, it's still difficult sometimes to identify and pinpoint these things because they are so normalized that they don't
Hmm.
pop out on our radar as much, because of just rote, exposures and things like that. So, um, yeah, I think we did a pretty decent job of hitting on some of the major ones. And yes, absolutely, comment below. If you liked this video, if you found it useful, please hit the like button. It really does help us out a lot. Um, and it's notable that we offer adaptive personal consultations on our website. Uh, by no means are we licensed professionals or anything like that, but we are very proficient at tapping into our intuition, but also being able to have that discernment and pick things apart from that natural law perspective. And even just having a perspective offered that isn't your own can help give you more of a dynamic on your view of things. So it really, we don't have to do this alone. We can really work together and solve problems as a team. So
Hmm.
check out thewizardfactory.com for that, as well as any of our other products and services. Everything is there. Again, we have our podcast in audio now available on all the major platforms. So I'm going to be adding that onto our website soon as well. So you can catch it on your commutes and all that good stuff. And that's going to be all that we have for you today. So we hope you liked it. And we'll see you next week. But until then, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.